Give it a couple minutes. Make sure your name appears in the picture. Good morning, Javier. I'm giving everybody a few minutes to go over to formative. And there's an assignment on formative to upload a pic of one of your 1, 2, 3 annotations that you did for homework. I want to see how we're doing with those. So you can just pick the one that you think is the best. Let's see how that's coming over here. Okay, good. If you don't have your homework done, then you can submit it later, but obviously the best grades go to the people who have their homework done and are present in class today. I want to reward that. People can still turn them in later and even tomorrow, but obviously I want to see how your progress is going with that 1, 2, 3 process. And I also want to make sure that people are completing their homework. So let's give it another minute or so. And then if you submit sometime during class, then you're okay. Go to the Blackboard. Looking good. I'm going to go ahead and start today's lesson because if you're still uploading, then that's fine. But the beginning part of class is always about me going over, sort of like what's happening and all that stuff. So we can all multitask. We're continuing with poetry this week. I think next week is the last week that we have for poetry. And then we'll be moving into drama for the remainder of the semester. So this week we'll be focusing on form and structure. There are a few updates for this week. It is a B week, so that means that you have formatives on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday this week. So there are reminders. I put reminders in the Google Classroom. I think that that's sort of like the easiest way to do it. Also a reminder that East uploads progress reports this Friday. It's also, I think Monday starts the second progress report for STC. They use a system called Starfish for that, and you can click over here on the left navigation and see Starfish here. It will take you to, if you click on it, it will take you to your student reports, so that if any, they call them flags. So if any of your instructors at STC have flagged you for some reason, it could be attendance, it could be concerns about grades or whatever, but when we do a flag, it's sort of like a progress report. And that flag goes to your advisor at STC, or like whoever's in charge of the dual program over there, also your counselor. So it's kind of like a progress report at STC, and we do those 2 or 3 times during the term. So you can check over there if you have Starfish, if you wanted to check that. So yeah, progress reports upload this Friday, so all grades should be updated by then, including the analytical papers. I'm more than halfway through those right now. So I've been reading them and making comments and that sort of thing. Some of them are excellent. I think I've given out 200 or 300s already on those papers. Some people really went to town with their analysis and did a fantastic job. There were some issues with some papers though, where some people, I guess, didn't get the whole concept of applying the lens. So there's some people that may end up doing some revision, that's their choice, but there were some papers that just sort of either summarized the story or kind of talked about literary elements like plot or characterization without applying a lens that I could see. Or there's some people who only applied the lens like in the conclusion, and the rest of the paper was a summary. So there are some papers that had issues like that. So do check when your papers return to you. Obviously they'll all be done by Thursday night, Friday morning, so that progress reports for East can go in. So if yours isn't up, I'm doing several a day. So whenever I have time in between lessons or later on in the evening, I'll usually sit and go through a number of them and go ahead and grade them and give comments. So if you haven't received yours back, it will be, next couple days. The last thing on updates is just a reminder to seniors about Apply Texas and FAFSA. I do want to highlight this part right here. The counselors are having a seminar tomorrow during our class time. So at 8 in the morning, seniors, if you need help with your FAFSA, if you have not already submitted, then the counselors would like you to join them. I'm going to send a separate Zoom link out later today because they're combining all my A classes and my B classes together tomorrow because of the pictures and stuff that are happening later in the week. So I'll send you a separate Zoom, and when you enter that Zoom tomorrow, this is just for seniors who are working on FAFSA, then I'll put you in a room with a counselor as soon as you enter. And then that way the counselor can work with you through that whole period on your FAFSA. So if you have questions, if you stalled out, if you haven't started and you need to get started, tomorrow at 8 a.m. the counselors will be live with you and can work with you on your FAFSA. Oh, the Zoom link is right here. I'll remind you too tonight, but here's the link for that. If you are already done with FAFSA and you've already submitted it, it's all finished, I recommend emailing your counselor and letting them know, because they have an objective to clear every student and make sure that every student has completed that. So if you don't show up tomorrow and they don't know that you've already done the FAFSA and it's already been submitted, then they're probably gonna start looking for you and emailing you about it. So save them the trouble, save yourself the hassle, and just email them and let them know that you've already submitted. and then they can just put a check mark next to your name and moving on. But if you do need help, they're going to be here tomorrow. And then of course, Thursday and Friday will be the yearbook pictures. So you should have received an email with a time, either Thursday or Friday. I think it's alphabetical. So they were telling me that it seemed alphabetical. If you have not received that email, then you can email Miss Garcia. I think it's A.N. Garcia. Oh, I put it in classroom for my other classes yesterday. Let me see. I think it's over here. Let me just double check her email. Yeah, A.N. Garcia is Miss Garcia, the journalism teacher, and she's in charge of the pictures. So if you haven't received a time slot to do your pictures, then you might want to email her if you want to be in the yearbook, because that's what the pictures are for. They'll also offer you a package or whatever. So it's my understanding that they'll be taking 2 different pictures, one with whatever you're wearing, and then another one with your yearbook outfit. They have a bow tie one, and then they have a drape with pearls. You've seen that in the yearbook, I'm sure. So they have some directions and things for you in the email. I think that's it. I know a couple of you just joined a couple of minutes ago. We did have a moment at the beginning of class where I asked people who are here and on time and have their homework done to submit a picture of one of the poems that you worked on for today. All 3 of them were about night, very different aspects of night. But pick whichever one you think is your best 1, 2, 3 annotation. I want to see how we're doing with that, how that's coming, that process, and then just upload a picture of it to Formative. Let's see how many people have already done it. Yes, there's already 6. What you can do is you can just, it'll look like this to you. You can just upload right here with the plus from your device. Formative works pretty good from your phone, actually. So if you just take a picture and submit it there, then that's good. It can be a picture of your book with Post-its in it. It can be a picture of your notebook page where you wrote out your 1, 2, 3 analysis. I think the easiest thing is to interact with the text. So if you printed out the document and did it on there, you know, like whichever way you did it, it's fine. But I want to start giving credit to the people who have their homework done, are here. I feel like those are the people who should be excelling in class. Right. Okay, moving on to the lesson for today. Just a reminder that there is another formative that's the usual daily formative. So make sure that you get to that. Homework check, I've already explained. So sometime during class, see if you can't upload that picture. If you have trouble uploading it to formative, you can email it to me or email me that you're having trouble or something. The best thing is communication. So you can get it to me one way or the other. Okay, so you should have read 2 sections from your textbook for today, and I want to go through them. As we're sort of wrapping up poetry, we do have some terminology to go over. So the first assignment, reading assignment, was recognizing types of poetry, which was pretty short. I mean, it's just the bottom part of this page. Definitely know the difference between a narrative poem and a lyric poem. And you can remember that because narrative just means a story. So if it's a poem that is telling a story and it's got somewhat of a plot, then that's kind of good to know, because then you can do characterization, you can look for conflict, you can look for all those things that we look for in fiction, right? You can look for rising action, climax. It might not be the same as in a novel or a short story, but if it's a narrative poem, you can look at setting, you can look at all those things that are functions of fiction. A lyric poem, you can't really do that because a lyric poem is just sort of philosophical, right? It's not about a specific scene or a specific set of events. So you should be able to tell on a first reading of a poem whether it's narrative or lyric. And then if it's lyric, you can start asking yourself, okay, what are the abstract concepts that are presented here? And what is the poet trying to say about them? If it's narrative poem, then you can be asking yourself, okay, what's the story? What's the plot line? What's the conflict? Who are these characters? And then overall, what is this story supposed to be teaching me? So there's a little bit of a breakdown on the second page of that assignment where you're being asked to understand about the difference between an epic and a ballad. I think they're very different forms, so it's not too hard to know the difference between an epic and a ballad. But epics are long. The Iliad and the Odyssey are epics. Beowulf is an epic. The Aeneid, there's lots of them. They give the example of Paradise Lost. All of those are epic poems. Then a ballad is a song. And so usually it's a song about some, highly emotional thing like a battle or a love gone wrong or something like that. Lyric poetry has a number of different forms that are listed here. You do need to know them, just basically. We're not going to read an example of each one of these, but second semester, we will be looking at most of them. There are certain time periods when these things were more pronounced, like elegies, odes, and pastorals have specific time periods where we see them popping up in literary history. And the second semester of this course is a totally different format. The second semester of this course is a survey of British literature. So we start with the most ancient literature and move into the, through time. So it's like sort of synonymous with history. So as we go through literary history, we're also looking at, European and world history. And so some of these forms will come up again second semester. Not all of you will be in this class second semester. I don't know if I've mentioned that, depending on your degree plan for STC. So if you are, I think it's the bio majors that don't end up taking the second semester because it's not required for the degree plan, they're going to move you to a regular English 4 class. Just be aware of that. So, that will probably happen. Okay, that's off topic. All right, so there are different forms of lyric poetry. An elegy is a poem that mourns somebody, usually a single person, but it could also be, multiple people or an event that is sad, that kind of thing. An ode is a poem that is in praise of someone. An aubade is another poem about mourning, but this time it's about the time of the day. An aubade, they don't really say it here, but I'll tell you. An aubade is a poem about the morning, specifically the morning after some lovers have had a liaison. So an aubade is it's not always about that, but traditionally it's about that. So, like the beautiful morning coming up after a night of passion. That's all I'll say about that. It gets awkward. Occasional poem is when somebody writes a poem for a specific reason. Sometimes I write poetry for a specific person for a specific purpose, and that's what we call occasional poems because it's for a specific occasion. But you'll sometimes see poems where it's like because of 9/11 or older pieces that are like from World War I because of a certain battle. Meditation is sort of, thought-provoking study on an emotion or some other abstract concept. A pastoral, those we usually find in the 17th century. Those are poems about countrysides and forests and sheep, stuff like that. A dramatic monologue is when the speaker is a character that has been created and they're speaking from their perspective to a bunch of people who can't respond. So it's sort of like a soliloquy in a way from a play. So those are just some terms to know. These are all types of lyric poetry, and then the two main types of narrative poetry are ballad and epic. So it's just kind of good to split up poetry into those two general categories, and then they do have a couple of subcategories. Is there anything that you want me to talk about some more with the that section? Okay. The other section was quite long, but I also think that it wasn't news to you. The reason that figures of speech is long is because they have a lot of examples. So there's a lot of poems in there where they're talking about basically, you know, the tropes of simile, metaphor, and personification. So I don't think those are new terms for anybody, but they do walk you through an examination of some specific poems looking at those qualities. There are some terminology that's, anything that's bold could end up being on your semester exam. So I'm hoping that you're making notes on those things. As I also, then I'll go through them usually in class. So extended simile, or sometimes it's called a heroic simile, is like an extended metaphor, except that it's like or as. I don't know, do they talk to you guys about the difference, not the physical difference between a metaphor and a simile, but the connotation difference between a metaphor and a simile? I don't know if they do that in previous grade. I mean, I know that they teach you metaphor and simile, but there's a reason why a poet would use a metaphor versus a simile, or any writer really, because we see metaphor and simile in other pieces. Let me see, there's a chat. Yeah, I don't think so either, because I mean, I've been teaching these classes for a while, and we do change staff members sometimes, so sometimes it's hard for me to know what's being emphasized at, you know, like the pre-AP level or the English 3. So when we're thinking about metaphor and simile, an important distinction to think about is, how forceful do I want to make this comparison? And if I say that something is something else, then it is replacing it, right? So it almost becomes symbolic then. If I say something is like something else, it's a softer way of making a comparison. I'll give you an example of how you can tell, like from everyday life. If my sister was eating dinner across the table from me and she was making a mess, I could say, "You're a pig," right? Which is rude, but gets the point across. But it's like literally saying that she's a pig. We could just take a pig and put it in her place and it would be the same thing. If I said, "You're eating like a pig," that's still not great, but can you see how it's a little more gentle? So a simile is like a suggestion of a comparison, and a metaphor is a straight up replacement comparison. So when a poet considers whether they want to say something is similar to something or it is something, then there's a little distinction there between the forcefulness of that comparison. And I don't think that we really consider that like is kind of softening the comparison a little bit, or as, you know, like we just look for, is there a like in this comparison, and we'll just say that it's a simile, but we don't really consider, why would the poet or the writer back off a little bit, or why would they be so bold as to say something is something else? Like the example that they have here, these metaphors here. It's not like a dream deferred is like a raisin in the sun. It's that it is, right? It's a direct comparison. So I don't know, sometimes when you're writing about comparison, those things can come up and you can consider what's being compared in metaphor versus what's being compared in simile. So then they walk you through several different examples. Let me stop on a couple of terms. Extended metaphor, extended simile, those are terms to know and be able to identify in poetry, because when a poet extends a metaphor for a stanza or a whole poem, then it's important for us to figure out all the aspects of the comparison. So it's not just that the poet is comparing, in this one, for example, the poet is comparing a poet to an acrobat. And the whole poem is about that comparison. And this is an extended simile because we have the poet like an acrobat. But then the whole poem is about all the things that the acrobat does, and we're supposed to relate that to a poet. How is a poet like an acrobat? Not just in one sense, but because it's extended, there are a lot of facets and qualities to the acrobat's job that the poem is saying overlap with a poet and what a poet does. So an extended metaphor or an extended simile in a poem is an opportunity to look at multiple overlapping comparisons. All right, so I'm going to say a poet is an acrobat in all these different ways, and I have to take the rest of the poem to explain them to you. Let me see, what else? Extended metaphors there, it's the same idea. If I'm going too fast, you can stop me. They have some example poems with some questions. I'm not a big read the thing and answer the questions type person. If we were in class, we might talk about these things, right? But I'm not big on that. I'm not sure that that demonstrates learning. So they have a bunch of poems to look at as examples of those things. This one's pretty hefty. So that's pretty much it for that passage. A note about personification. What are they saying here about personification? It's back before all these example ones. I'm looking for where they have the, do they have it in the terminology, or maybe it comes later in the chapter. So a note about, oh, here it is. So personification is here on, well, like the second page. So a comparison is, an example of personification is a metaphor. It's just that one half of the metaphor is already explained to be a person. So you cannot compare two people together and call it personification. It has to be something that doesn't have human qualities being compared to a person. So if the cat was flirting, then we would call that personification. But if we said that a person was flirting, well, people flirt, so. But personification is just a type of comparison. It's just that half of the comparison is already known because one half of it is the person. But you've studied that before as well. All right, anything about this section or any of those poems that you read toward the end of the chapter that I can go over with you? Are there any of these that you want to talk about? Isn't it cute that when they're talking about metaphors and similes, they have a poem called Metaphor and a poem called Simile? All are so literal. But we can take time if there's anything in that section that you want me to go over. Okay. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the poems for this week, just a few minutes, because of the three, two of them are written in sort of a free verse style, and that would be Nightfall and Wild Nights. This week our focus is on form, so your reading assignment is going to focus on the form of a poem. But Acquainted with the Night has a very specific format, so I kind of wanted to just talk about that for a second. Acquainted with the Night is a super famous Robert Frost poem, and it goes like this. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have looked down the coldest city lane, the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night. So there is a form and a pattern to this poem, and I wanted to bring it up just because you're going to be reading about form this week in your reading assignment. Obviously, there's repetition here with the first 5 lines starting with I have, and then you've got another one here, and then the repetition of the first line again here at the end. So repetition is an element of form. If a poet is repeating something, then obviously they're trying to drive that image or that idea home to you. It's, it's the reason why we repeat things. But this poem is what we call terza rima. Let me see if I can, I'm gonna for the first time type something on the screen here. Terza rima. I know that if I don't type it, it will get spelled all kinds of ways in the notebook. So terza rima. So terza rima is a really tough poetry form to do because it's really tight in its form. It's got 10 syllables per line, like a sonnet. It has 14 lines, like a sonnet, but the structure on the rhyme is different. The structure on the rhyme, as you can see here, goes A, B, A, but then B again, C, B. So it's like sometimes they call it interlocking rhyme, because the double rhyme from the next stanza is present in the middle line of the previous stanza. So then we have, what, C, no wait, beat is, yes, C, D, C. So you can see that it's interlocking. And then D, A, because it goes back to light and night, and then sky, D, and then A, A. So terza rima is what we call closed form. A closed form poem like a sonnet or a VNL, or there's a bunch of them that you're going to read about this week, is sort of a prescription for a poem, and a poet has to follow all of the rules for that particular type of poem in order for it to qualify. So terza rima is just one of them, and it's kind of hard to write a poem that has all these qualifications and it says something, poignant. So this one is an example of that. I wanted to point that out to you. This poem is sort of sad to me, I think. This one is sort of about loneliness, right? If you were looking at your topics, I think loneliness is a good topic for this one. Isolation, maybe. That kind of thing. But hopefully you worked with this one and came up with a poetic idea. Maybe it's the one that you submitted, I don't know. All right, the last thing I want to do today is talk to you about the little, hey, can we make that go away? Hold on, it's gonna bother me. I just wanted it on the, oh, okay. It's the first time I ever used that tool in Zoom, okay. So there's not a paper to do for poetry, good thing, right? But we do have a little project to do, and that is poetry analysis video. So maybe you already looked at this. I did put it on last week just so you could get a heads up about the project. So if you click on that, it will take you to the assignment sheet for it. So what I want you to do for this project is I want you to choose a poem or a pair of poems. You can choose either 1 or 2 poems if you would like to do 2. And the only qualification for choosing the poem, well, there's a couple, but the main focus that I want you to choose when you're looking for your poem is that I want it to be about a social issue. It can be about a social issue that's happening now. You can go and find poems about, you know, politics or Black Lives Matter or immigration or, you know, whatever topic is of interest to you. Or you can also pick a historical social issue. There are a lot of issue poems from the Industrial Revolution, from all time periods. Really, people have expressed their concern about society through poetry. So I want you to create, you know, choose a poem that really speaks to you, that you think there's a lot going on in the poem. And I want you to do a video explication of that poem. Now, an explication is just a detailed analysis. So if you want, you can just do a 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis and record it. You do not have to appear in the video. You can just do a voiceover if you want. But I want you to think of it almost as a lesson that you're doing, because other people will choose other poems. And there's a second part to this project where after everybody turns them in, I think they're due on the 31st, the videos. After everybody turns in the videos, then I'm going to ask you to watch 2 of your classmates' videos and respond to them. So in a way, they're going to be learning about that social issue and about that poem from your video presentation, if that makes sense. Now, do not pick a poem that doesn't show a social issue or is on a social issue that you're uncomfortable with. You know, if there's a poem about abortion and you don't want to speak about it, then don't pick that poem. Also, pick one that is long enough and has enough depth to sustain about a 10-minute video lesson. I'm going to give a grace period, 2 minutes on both sides of that. So as long as it's, you know, 8 to 11, 12 minutes, somewhere in there, then you're okay. But if you pick a poem that doesn't have a lot of depth, then you're probably not going to make the 8-minute mark. So definitely pick something that you can discuss and talk about the poetic techniques, but also the concepts that are presented, what makes it a social issue, what is the person trying to say about that social issue, and so on. So the requirements are here. Make sure that you pick a poem that has been formally published. It can be published in video form or book form, online, but it cannot be an anonymous poem, and I don't want it to be from an internet author. Like an internet pseudonym. If you go, there's some websites where people self-publish their poetry and stuff, and that's cool, and I think that that's a good thing, but it's not what we would call academic. So if the only author you can find is Fairy Princess 88, I don't want you to do a poem from Fairy Princess 88. I want to have a name of a person that actually exists. Not some sort of internet pseudonym. So if you can't find the person's real name, then you need to forget that poem and pick something else. I did put a bunch of resources and places to get started looking for these types of poems here at the bottom to give you a head start. Then there's some details here about the video. You can just shoot it with your phone. It doesn't have to be fancy. You know, just you going over the poem. If you want to appear in your video, you can. I think that's probably more interesting for people, but I'm not going to grade you on whether or not you appeared in a video. You could do a PowerPoint. You could do, you know, a recording of you sort of like handwriting on a copy of the poem, whatever works for you. But your explication needs to help your classmates understand how elements of poetry are used to create the theme and the meaning of the social issue. So you can talk about metaphor, imagery, structure, stanzas, all that stuff that we do in our 1, 2, 3 analysis, but ultimately it needs to contribute to what is the poet trying to say about this social issue that you're presenting. Now, I want you to add at the end of your video 2 study questions. And those study questions should be interpretive in nature. In other words, they shouldn't be like definitions of words or asking people something that you already presented in the video. It should be something like what I do in the formative questions, in a way, where it's sort of like getting people to think in a little more depth. Maybe you want to pull one line out and say, you know, that you didn't analyze directly in your video. Maybe you want to say, how does this idea contribute to the overall meaning of the poem? So you should have 2 study questions. Maybe what I'll do, you know what I was thinking I should do? It just occurred to me, I'll put it on my to-do list. Maybe what I'll do is I'll put a bunch of stems, like types of questions that you can ask to help. Would that help? Yeah, I think so. Okay. I'll link it here on this assignment page so that while you're working, like stems for questions about poetry. That way, obviously, then you can use those stems to help you come up with your own questions. You'll have to customize them, like they'll just be basic questions, and then you'll have to customize it for the poem that you've chosen. But I'll put some here. I'll put a link on this little blurb right here somewhere later today or tomorrow, so that it will help you make questions. I try to think of those things ahead of time, but like what would help you, but sometimes they just come to me. Okay, then after everybody submits their videos on the 31st, then you will go back in and look at 2 of your classmates' videos. You can choose whichever ones you want and watch those videos and answer their study questions and kind of give a little critique, mainly focusing on, you know, the positives of the person's analysis. So it'll be praise or constructive criticism about the presentation, and also answer their 2 study questions. We're going to be doing that in the discussion section of Blackboard. So let me show you that. I did make a little video about how to upload your video. So there's a video about how to upload your video. I don't know, some people are better at like video editing than other people. Some people will just record it straight up on their phone and then just upload it as is. Some people will use a video editor like iMovie or something like that. All that is up to you. If you don't know how to make a video at all, then contact me and I'll give you a little tutorial or something. But we're going to be posting that here under class discussions. And I already made a video that explains how to do it, but once you get your video completed, this is where you will upload it. Now, it's not due for 2 weeks. So maybe I'll talk about it a little bit more next week, but this is the location where you will upload your video. Maybe you want to save your video to Google Drive. Maybe you have it on your laptop or your phone, but you will need to put it into the discussion board. That way your classmates will be able to see it and comment on it for the second part of the grade. But that's here under class discussions over here on the side. Okay, where was I? I'll go back to this. The due dates are here. Saturday the 31st or sooner. And then the critique you have until the following Wednesday. That's because grades are due, I think the grades are due the following Monday, so I want to include that in the second 6 weeks. There's a scoring rubric already set up for both parts of this assignment. The first part is the presentation, and then where's the one on the, okay, I guess it, okay, the peer evaluation is down here. So there's a rubric for each part of the assignment here, so you should look that over. Obviously, you want to be over here in the excellent category, do all of those things. Last thing I have on here is some different resources. You do not have to use these resources. These are not, you know, me telling you these are the only places you can find social issue poetry. You can definitely do your own searches. Just keep in mind that you need to have an actual name of a real person, author, and it needs to, you know, not just be an random internet thing that you're putting for your poem. But these are some places to start. So if you wanted to just start looking around, it will take you a while to pick a poem. So kind of factor that into your planning, because you would think that it would take longer to make the video, and maybe it would, but I think it also takes longer than you expect to choose the poem that you want to use. So give yourself enough time, you know, kind of space it out and say, okay, well, if this week I figure out which poem I'm going to do and kind of work through that poem about what I want to say, and then next week I can film the video, you know, kind of segment it out for yourself so that you have a good plan for accomplishing your completed video. If you're having trouble making a video, if you're having trouble finding a poem, please contact me. It is too late to tell me on Friday the 30th of October that you were unable to find a poem and it's the video's due tomorrow. You know, like that's just sort of negligent. If in the next week you're having trouble finding a poem, you need a little more guidance than what I have here, then just contact me. Like maybe you have in mind a topic that you are interested in, but you can't find any poetry on that. You know, just let me know and I'll see what I can find for you. But communication is always the key. You'll get more sympathy from your instructors if you handle things in a timely manner instead of at the last minute. So I'm hoping that this will give us something to think about, something different than a paper. And that way we can still practice our poetry explication. So where was I? Here. There's a video how to upload it here. But I think that's going to be more crucial. Next week, I'll put the assignment at the bottom of the module so that you can upload it to the discussion and it will be an assignment that can get graded. But for now, here's the project page, and then here's also how to submit. I also have it here too, because I wanted to make sure that I talked about it today. So any questions on that project? It doesn't have to be high tech. So just do it whatever way makes sense to you. All right, we have 3 formatives this week, just a reminder about that. And then for next class time, I want you to read in your textbook on form, which is just a few pages. It always looks like more than what it is because there's all those example poems where they're trying to demonstrate things for you. You should read those poems, but you just read them as examples of what they're talking about at that point in the chapter. And then there are 3 poems that I want you to do. They're all sonnets. And I want for you to do a 1, 2, 3 analysis. I need to go back in and put in the documents here because some people I know will choose to print it out or do a virtual version from a PDF. So I'll go ahead, let me put that on my to-do list too. I'll go ahead and put either docs or PDFs there later today. All right. So this is for next Tuesday, and then you can also get started on your project. We do have one more paper to do, but that one we're going to do, it's a research paper, and we'll be doing it while we're doing drama. So usually that one starts in November, mid-November. All right. Are there any questions about the project or this week's assignments? Anything I can go over in more detail for you?